Something fundamental just shifted in the global order, and most Americans are only catching the surface of it. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov came forward with a direct and unambiguous warning. Any US strike on Iran would carry dangerous consequences, and what was already unfolding was, in his own words, playing with fire. That is not diplomatic noise. That is a nuclear-armed power drawing a line in the sand, out loud, on the record. Russia condemned the US-Israeli strikes on Iran as a premeditated and unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign UN member state, and then went further. Lavrov warned that the logical consequence of these strikes could be that forces inside Iran would emerge in favor of doing exactly what the Americans claim they want to prevent, acquiring a nuclear bomb, because, as he put it plainly, the US does not attack those who already have one. Let that land for a moment. The IAEA has lost track of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, with inspectors unable to verify its location due to the ongoing strikes. Meanwhile, diplomatic talks had been making real progress. Iran had agreed to never pursue a nuclear weapon, yet President Trump said he was not thrilled with those talks, and the strikes followed shortly after. This is the world you are living in right now. The talks in Geneva were described by everyone in the room as the most serious round yet, a last real chance at diplomacy before Trump decided whether to launch a war. Think about what that means for a moment. You have American envoys sitting across from Iranian diplomats and the Omani foreign minister, who has been quietly holding this whole process together, coming out publicly and saying that there had been real breakthroughs, that Iran had expressed willingness to give up its enriched uranium and not accumulate more. That is not a small thing. That is Iran putting something significant on the table. And yet, Trump told reporters as he left the White House that he was not happy with the way they were negotiating, that he was not thrilled, and that Iran could not have nuclear weapons. And within days, the bombs were falling. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand something about the context that the American public was never properly given. The 2025 US intelligence community assessment had judged Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. That is the official assessment of American intelligence agencies, not Russian intelligence, not Iranian state media. American intelligence. Neither the IAEA nor American intelligence confirmed that Iran had or was trying to produce nuclear weapons, and Lavrov made sure to say that plainly on the record more than once. So when the stated justification for going to war is preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and your own intelligence services tell you Iran is not currently building one, you have to ask yourself, what is this war actually about? Russia's foreign ministry accused the US and Israel of hiding their true intention of regime change in Tehran under the cover of negotiations to normalize relations with Iran. And when you watch the sequence of events that unfolded, it is very difficult to argue with that reading, because here is what happened, step by step. The two sides were in active negotiations. Iran and the United States had identified the main elements of a possible agreement and discussed those elements. There were still differences, but in most cases a general understanding had been reached on how to resolve them. Technical teams were being assigned to meet in Vienna. The process was moving, and then it wasn't. Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi said he was dismayed that active and serious negotiations had yet again been undermined. That word, dismayed, is telling. This is a man who spent months building diplomatic bridges, who publicly said peace was within reach, and who watched it all collapse, not because the talks failed, but because the bombs came before the talks could finish. Russia watched all of this very closely. Dmitry Medvedev, Russia's Security Council deputy chairperson, said bluntly, "All the negotiations with Iran were just a cover operation. No one ever wanted to agree on anything in particular. Now you may look at Medvedev and dismiss him as someone who says provocative things, but look at the record. The pattern here is not new. This is a pattern that students of American foreign policy have seen before. Negotiations that are used not to reach a deal, but to buy time for military positioning, to exhaust the other side, to generate enough optics of diplomacy that the war feels justified when it comes." Analysts had warned that absent a diplomatic breakthrough in the coming days, the US risked entering into a military clash with significant escalatory potential. Washington's priorities remained unclear as it pressed a wide-ranging list of demands for Tehran. A wide-ranging list of demands is often a sign that the goal is not agreement, it is surrender. And when surrender is not forthcoming, war becomes the next tool. On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States began coordinated joint attacks on various sites in Iran, codenamed Operation Roaring Lion by Israel and Operation Epic Fury by the United States. The strikes targeted Iranian leadership, nuclear facilities, military infrastructure, and the compound of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself. Trump and Israeli officials later confirmed that Israeli strikes on Tehran killed Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Additional U.S. strikes targeted military sites in Isfahan, Karaj, Kermanshah, Qom, and Tabriz. And in retaliation, Iran fired ballistic missiles at Israel and U.S. military bases in Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global oil and gas shipments. The world's most critical energy choke point shut down. The consequences of that single act alone ripple through every economy on Earth, including yours. Now let us talk about what Russia said, and why it matters more than most people understand. Lavrov warned that threats of new military strikes against Iran were absolutely unacceptable and that any repeat of military aggression would have dire consequences for the West Asia region and international security. He also issued a more specific and strategically chilling warning that striking Iranian nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguards risked causing a nuclear incident, that there were real risks of radiological contamination. And he was right to say that. The IAEA chief Rafael Grossi said, while no radiological release had been detected, the situation remained serious. He stated plainly that a possible radiological release with serious consequences could not be ruled out, including the necessity to evacuate areas as large or larger than major cities. Major cities. That is not a footnote in a technical report. That is a warning about the potential contamination of densely populated civilian areas in a region that hundreds of millions of people call home. The IAEA chief underscored the risk of nuclear incidents from the military escalation, noting that Iran and many other countries in the region that had been subjected to military attacks have operational nuclear power plants and nuclear research reactors. The UAE has 4 operating nuclear reactors, while Jordan and Syria have operational nuclear research reactors. Bahrain, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, all of which had been attacked, all use nuclear applications of some kind. So when you hear the words surgical strike and precision operation, understand that the Middle East is not a blank canvas. It is a region woven through with nuclear infrastructure, and every escalation in that environment carries consequences that cannot be fully controlled once they begin. Russia accused the US and Israel of plunging the Middle East into an abyss of uncontrolled escalation, and warned the attacks risked triggering a humanitarian, economic, and possibly radiological catastrophe in the region. That language, uncontrolled escalation, is the part that should keep people up at night. Because controlled escalation is already bad enough, uncontrolled escalation is when the logic of war takes over from the logic of human decision-making, when retaliatory strikes begat counter-retaliatory strikes, when alliances and proxies activate one by one, and when leaders on all sides find themselves caught inside a chain of events they can no longer stop. Iran launched strikes on civilian airports and shipping ports in Kuwait, the UAE, and Oman. Britain's Akrotiri and Dhekelia military base in Cyprus was struck. Hezbollah in Lebanon joined the war after the killing of Khamenei. Lebanon banned military activities by Hezbollah after the attacks. Even Lebanon's own government trying to restrain Hezbollah in the middle of a regional war is an indication of just how fast this is spinning beyond anyone's control. A leading Iranian Shia cleric issued an order for Muslims to wage jihad against the United States and Israel to avenge the killing of Supreme Leader Khamenei. Another leading cleric issued a fatwa declaring an obligation for all Muslims to avenge his blood. This is the world that was created by the decision to end the negotiations and begin the bombing. And this is precisely what Lavrov was warning about when he said that escalating military action would undo the positive steps of recent years, including the dramatically improved relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between Tehran and its Arab neighbors, between a country that had been isolated and a region that had been slowly, carefully, painfully finding its way toward a new equilibrium. All of that gone. Russia's pro-war Telegram channels suggested Russia let Tehran borrow a nuclear bomb. Some called into question the wisdom of negotiating about anything with Trump following the strikes on Iran. Now, those are fringe voices inside Russia's own political landscape, but their existence matters. Because when a government's own hardliners start asking whether diplomacy is even worth pursuing with Washington, you are watching the erosion of one of the most important things the world needs right now, which is any remaining shared belief that problems can be solved without war. And it is not just Russia. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi told his Israeli counterpart that the attack on Iran came as negotiations had made significant progress, including addressing Israel's security concerns, and that this process had been interrupted by military action. Two of the world's most powerful countries, both permanent members of the UN Security Council, both with nuclear arsenals, both now watching a war that they warned against, unfold exactly as they feared. While Russia has a military pact with Iran, this does not include requirements to come to Iran's defense. That is an important distinction. Russia is not obligated to enter this war, but obligation and interest are two different things. The Kremlin appears to be considering the potential dividends of the crisis for Russia, such as the diversion of US focus and Western weapons supplies away from Ukraine. So even in Russia's restraint, there is calculation. While American military and financial attention is pulled toward the Persian Gulf, the pressure on Ukraine shifts. The battlefield in Europe does not disappear. It simply gets less attention, less resupply, less political bandwidth from Washington. Every war has second-order effects, and in this case, the second-order effects stretch from Eastern Europe to East Asia. By early March, missile strikes had been reported in Bahrain, Jordan, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, in addition to Israel. Indications showed that around 550 civilians had been killed in Iran since the country came under attack, and Iran, in its response to the UN Human Rights Council, said that schools had been bombed, hospitals subjected to indiscriminate attacks, civilian leaders, including the spiritual and religious supreme leader, had been assassinated, and the headquarters of the Iranian Red Crescent, along with many other non-military buildings, had been destroyed. Whether one supports this war or opposes it, those facts deserve to be looked at squarely, because wars are not fought only between soldiers. They are fought in the air, above cities. They land on hospitals. They land on schools. They land on families who had nothing to do with enriched uranium or geopolitical rivalries. Lavrov said key regional players, particularly Arab nations and the Persian Gulf states, were keen to avoid further escalation of tensions, and that Arab countries were sending clear signals to the US calling for restraint and a search for an agreement that would not infringe on Iran's lawful rights. Those signals were sent, they were received, and then they were set aside. And that, more than anything else, is what Lavrov's warning was really about. Not just the tactical risks of striking Iran, not just the radiological concerns, not just the regional blowback, but the message that is sent to the entire world when one nation decides that the signals of every other nation, every diplomatic mediator, every international institution, and its own intelligence agencies simply do not matter. Russia placed full responsibility for the escalation on the United States and Israel, saying responsibility for the negative consequences of this man-made crisis, including an unpredictable chain reaction and spiraling violence, lies entirely with them. That is a statement of legal and moral positioning that Russia intends to hold on to, because what comes after this war matters as much as the war itself. Who gets to rebuild Iran and under what terms? Who controls the post-war narrative? Who fills the power vacuum left by the death of a supreme leader who had governed for nearly 4 decades? Trump said at exactly 2:30 a.m. on February 28 that the purpose of the US strikes in Iran was effectively regime change. Trump said that Iran's menacing activities endangered the US and its allies and cited the Iran hostage crisis, support for proxies such as Hamas and Hezbollah, its killings of protesters, and its alleged pursuit of nuclear weapons. Regime change? Regime. That is the word that unlocks everything. Because regime change is not a military operation with a defined end date. It is an open-ended transformation of a society, a government, a civilization, and history shows very clearly what happens in the aftermath of such transformations when they are imposed from the outside. Russia knows this, China knows this, the Arab states who were quietly pleading for restraint know this. And in the weeks and months ahead, as the dust over Tehran begins to settle and the real questions of what comes next begin to emerge, Russia's voice, the one that spoke clearly before any of this began, the one that said, "This is playing with fire," will be the voice that much of the world outside the West looks back to and says, "They were right."